Anjali Rimi, pronouns she, her, they, them. It is a delight to be here, and I'm really honored that Desi Rainbow has taken this time to build a structure that's going to bring us together as parents and children of those amazing parents. Um, I'm here in Oakland, California with my mom, Gauri, and I'll let her introduce herself.
My name is Gauri and Anjali's mother. Very happy to meet all of you. Thank you.
If I don't introduce my dog, a lady, she's like my mom's second daughter. She'll just jump up and down. So just want to say that because she loves attention. I'm just a human being. I'm just a woman of trans experience that wants to see families come together. And within the South Asian community, it's about blood families, and if that is the rock and the foundation of it. So for me, building those roots and those relationships back was important. I was born in Hyderabad and grew up there a little before my 20 years, um, and came here to the US about 20 years ago now, did my master's in business administration. I've been mostly working in e-commerce and supply chain for all of the big retailers out there, and newly went into the wine industry. And, I've lived in 11 cities, 7 states, 3 provinces, and in Singapore, Canada, America, and India, all trying to find a place where I belong. And I've been in the Bay Area for about 5 years now, and I am now putting down my roots in Oakland, California.
Thank you so much. So Anjali Akka, when did you first know that you were trans? And also, I noted that you said that you are a woman of trans experience, and I think that's a phrasing that not everyone hears. So if you could explain that a little more as well.
Absolutely. I'll start with the second question. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and it's very important for us to recognize that women come in various shapes and sizes and forms and languages and appearances. And trans women, when you say trans women, phonetically, it just sounds like you're putting the women part secondary to your trans identity. So when you say women of trans experience, it kind of illuminates the folks to recognize you as a woman first, and then understand that you bring a unique perspective of being trans. And I think I didn't know the word trans. I don't think I knew until I was 26, but I knew growing up and understanding that I wasn't like my brother and I wasn't like any other male child growing up. And I've said this before, where I thought I would just grow up, wake up one day, and I would just be a woman, like, if I may say it, like just everything woman. And that didn't happen. So the realization came gradual. It was organic. It was gradual. It wasn't overnight because I just didn't know. There wasn't a measure of anybody I could see around me and say, this is how I'm supposed to be and not supposed to be. But I definitely knew that, I wasn't born in the right body at a very young age. Well, gender journey I'm still on it. The train's still going. It's stopped in many stations. Um, you know, came here 7 seas over, thought this is where I can find that journey and be myself and live my authentic life. But that eluded me for another 8 years after I came to North America. And, one of the pieces of journey was, and I don't want to say this is stereotypical, but when you're on a trans journey, you are in an exponential phase of learning about yourself, learning about how you are treated externally. So my journey began here in the Bay Area, and I was in an employment where it was not accepted. So I ended up losing my job and my H-1B status. I'd leave this country, go to Canada, start all over again. And one of the things that happened to me there was I realized that in my journey, there's much more than my gender. In my journey, there was that of a woman of color, that of a woman, that of an immigrant, that of one with an accent, that one who didn't have access to spaces and seats typically occupied by white cis men. So, very quickly, I kind of enveloped myself in talking very little about my gender, but a lot more about all of my other accomplishments. And for 13 of the 19 years I've been myself, I have not been out and open as a trans woman with pride. I had a serious illness, non-trans related, about 5 years ago. That's also when mom had a stroke and life just didn't, seem right, because I was running from one place to another. And I was also married at that time. And that's when I realized that their sense of belonging is within me. I can't keep looking for it elsewhere. And it took so long for me to find that. So, it's still happening. It's still a journey. What I say is I'm now surrounded by beautiful people and those that are on this journey with me. And previously, I felt like I was very alone on it. So it's kind of, gone through the desert, gone through the bridges, and now we're like going through the forest, and it's beautiful.
తప్పకుండా. చిన్నప్పటి నుంచి కొంచెం డిఫరెంట్‌గా ఉండేదండి. మా పెద్దబ్బాయికి తనకి చాలా డిఫరెంట్‌గా ఉండేది తను. నాకు అర్థం కాలేదండి. ఐ డోంట్ నో అబౌట్ దిస్. అస్సలు తెలీదు. గమనించలేదు. తర్వాత తను గ్రాడ్యుయల్‌గా ఇలాగ డైవర్ట్ అవ్వడం మొదలుపెట్టింది. అయితే ఇంక నేను కొంచెం మాది పెద్ద ఫ్యామిలీ అండి. ఎవరైనా ఏమన్నా అనుకుంటారు, అందరి పిల్లలు శుభ్రంగా ఉన్నారు. నువ్వేంటి ఇట్లా ఉన్నావు? నువ్వు ఇలా ఉండకూడదు. నన్నేమనుకుంటారు అందరూను. ఇదే ఫీలింగ్ అనమాట. దాంతో తనని చాలా బాధ పెట్టాను. మారాలి, నువ్వు ఇలా ఉండకూడదు. నువ్వు మగ పిల్లోడిలాగే ఉండాలి అని. కానీ వినలేదండి. చాలా కష్టపడింది పాపం. నేను ఇలాగే ఉంటానమ్మా. ఐ యామ్ హ్యాపీ ఇన్ దిస్. నన్ను ఇన్సిస్ట్ చేయొద్దు. డోంట్ ఇన్సిస్ట్ మీ అని. క్రయింగ్ అండ్ ఎవ్రీథింగ్. నేను కూడా బాగా తిట్టాను, కొట్టాను, అన్నీ చేశానండి. అన్నం మానేశాను, మాట్లాడడం మానేశాను. 2 ఏళ్ళు మాట్లాడలేదండి. అయినా ఇంక మారలేదు. ఎందుకంటే ఈ బాధ కంటే నా మనసులో ఉన్న బాధే ఎక్కువమ్మా. ఐ హావ్ టు చేంజ్. నేను ఇలా ఉండి ఈ బాధతో నేను ఉండలేను అని. తర్వాత నాకు అర్థమైందండి. సరే మనం ఈ సమాజం కోసం, వాళ్ళ కోసం, వీళ్ళ కోసం మన కన్న బిడ్డని దూరం చేసుకోకూడదు. ఏదైతే అయిందిలేండి. నేను నీకు సపోర్ట్ ఉంటాను అని చెప్పి తనతోనే ఇంక ఉన్నానండి. ఫుల్ సపోర్టు. నీకు ఎటువంటి ఇది రాదమ్మా. నేను నీకు ఉంటాను నీకు. ఈవెన్ మా హస్బెండ్ కూడా పెద్ద కోఆపరేట్ చేయలేదండి. ఆయనకి ఇష్టం లేదు. ఎందుకంటే వాళ్ళ తమ్ముళ్ళు, పిల్లలు అందరూ ఉన్నారు. మా తమ్ముళ్ళు వాళ్ళు ఏమనుకుంటారు ఇలా ఉంటే అని ఆయన బాధండి. మా పెద్దబ్బాయికి కూడా సేమ్. అదేంటమ్మా తమ్ముడు ఇది ఉంటాడనుకుంటే ఇలా చేస్తున్నారేంటి? అబ్బబ్బా! అసలు బాలేదు అని వాడి ఫీలింగ్. ఎవ్వరు మాట్లాడడం మానేశారు అందరూ. ఎక్సెప్ట్ మీ. తర్వాత అప్పుడు తను కెనడాలో ఉన్నప్పుడు ఫస్ట్ టైం వెళ్ళానండి. వెళ్ళినప్పుడు చాలా ప్రేమగా చూస్తుంది. అసలు కళ్ళమ్మట నీళ్ళు పెట్టేసుకుని, నా కోసం నువ్వు వచ్చావమ్మా అని ఎంతో ఇదైపోయింది. ఇంక అప్పటి నుంచి నా మనసు కరిగిపోయిందండి. సరే అయితే అయింది నా బిడ్డ మారని. పోనీ తనకి ఎలా హ్యాపీగా ఉంటే అలాగే ఉండని. ఈ సమాజం కోసం వాళ్ళేమనుకుంటారు, అమ్మ ఏమనుకుంటుంది ఇలా అనుకోవద్దు. నా బిడ్డే నాకు ముఖ్యం. నేను నీతోనే ఉంటానమ్మా అని అప్పటి నుంచి తనతోనే ఉండిపోయానండి.
Fun fact here, because she's made me very emotional, is that was the first time she didn't tell anybody and got on a flight. She was in the US and crossed international border by herself and shows up at my home without even telling me. Even I didn't know she was coming.
మనకి వాళ్ళకంటే ఇంకేం కావాలండి? మన పిల్లలే కదండి మనం ప్రపంచానికి తీసుకొచ్చింది మనమే. అందుకని వాళ్ళ మంచి చెడ్డలన్నీ మనమే చూసుకోవాలి. ఇష్టమో నిష్ఠూరమో కానివ్వాలంతే.
It's been a journey. Like my mom said, it was really, really difficult. I think it was denial. And a denial, an intergenerational denial. I understood that my dad would have a really, really hard time. Because growing up and everything, I always say this, I was a very strong woman trapped in a man's body, but I was a very weak man in a man's body. So I was very much the go-getter. I had 86 certificates by the time I finished 10th class. I had a President's Award for bravery. So I was like the laurel of the family. So for him, it just felt like the rug was pulled underneath him. And then I say intergenerational because my brother had been living here already by then. And I hope he's not in the audience. I love you. And he, really, 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 really had a very hard time accepting it. I never look at what has transpired because I believe that my family's on a journey with me. They're still on a journey with me. My dad or my brother would never sit here and have an interview like this or even talk to anybody in the community. So I think it's still going on. But, one thing I've realized is that let's pick on the points in my life that help me feed off of and that are positive, that are milestones, and continue to do that. Factually, like once I got kicked out of this country, I went to Canada, and Canada is a little bit more conducive to transition compared to the US. So I was able to get access to hormones rather than having to buy it off the streets, which I was doing in the Bay Area, and then was able to start my life over. And that's where I went into stealth, and stealth is a word that's used for those that are cis-assuming and don't define themselves or identify themselves as trans, primarily for safety reasons. And yeah, I kind of moved up in the career ladder and all that. And the journey has really, really been a hockey stick projectile. But then I also believe now that the calmness of the soul and the stability of life has been with me since I've started to live authentically.
సపోర్ట్ అంటే ఇచ్చిన వాళ్ళు ఇచ్చారండి, లేని వాళ్ళు కొంచెం క్రిటిసైజ్ చేశారు, ఒప్పుకోవాలి అది. కానీ నేను చెప్పేది ఏంటంటే తను ఎవరికి ఏమీ అన్యాయం చేయలేదు, చదువుకుంది, చక్కటి ఉద్యోగం చేసుకుంటుంది, చక్కగా సెటిల్ అయింది, తల్లిదండ్రుల్ని ఎంతో ప్రేమగా చూసుకుంటుంది. షీఈస్ గివింగ్ ఫైనాన్షియల్ సపోర్ట్ ఆల్సో అండి మాకు. మరి ఇంకేం కావాలి మాకు? మీరందరూ ఏది నచ్చినా నచ్చకపోయినా మా బిడ్డే, మేము వాటితోనే ఉంటాం. అలా మీరు అన్నా కూడా మాకేమి తప్పు అనిపించదు. మీ అభిప్రాయాలు మీవి, కానీ కొంతమంది మాత్రం అగ్రీ అయ్యారండి. ఓకే, వాళ్ళు హ్యాపీగా ఉండడమే మనకు కావాలి. అలా అని మా చెల్లి, మా అత్తమ్మ ఒక ఆవిడ ఒప్పుకున్నారు, ఓకే అని. మన ఇండియా వచ్చినప్పుడు కూడా కలిసిందండి. అందరూ, నేనే భయపడ్డాను, బాబోయ్ ఎలాగ నేను ఫేస్ చేయాలి, అసలు ఎలా చెప్పాలబ్బా అని. కానీ లక్కీగా అండర్స్టాండ్ అయ్యిందండి. కానీ కొంతమంది కాలేదు, నో ప్రాబ్లం, ఇంకా వాళ్ళని వదిలేసేయాలి అంతే. అంత కమ్యూనిటీ అని పట్టుకోకూడదండి. ఇక్కడికి వచ్చాక ఇంకా నేను ఫ్రీ బర్డ్. ఇక్కడ అంతా ఎల్జిబిటి వాళ్ళు, పిల్లలు, వీళ్ళ ఫ్రెండ్స్ అందరూ వాళ్ళే అండి, మామూలు వాళ్ళు ఎవరు లేరు. అందరు ట్రాన్స్జెండర్స్ కానీ వీళ్ళే అనమాట. అందరూ వస్తారండి ఇంటికి, అమ్మ అమ్మ అంటూ. ఇంకా భోజనాలని, మేము దోశలని అన్నీ వేసుకు తింటాం, శుభ్రంగా హ్యాపీగా ఉంటాం. అక్కడ మన ఇండియా వెళ్ళినప్పుడు కూడా అక్కడ కూడా తనకి గ్రూప్ ఉంది కదండి, రచన, రూత్, ఆవిడ డాక్టర్ అండి. నాకు అక్కడికి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు మా వారికి నాకు కోవిడ్ వచ్చింది. వస్తే పాపం ఆ రూత్ డాక్టర్ కదండి, తను ట్రాన్స్జెండర్, ఎంత ప్రేమగా చూసుకుందండి. రికవర్ చేసి ఫ్లైట్ ఎక్కించి పంపించిందండి మమ్మల్ని ఇక్కడికి. అంత కోవిడ్లో కూడా రాకూడని పరిస్థితుల్లో కూడా పాపం వచ్చి ఇంటికి చెప్పింది. అది చాలండి, ఎవరేమనుకున్నా కూడా నాకేమి బాధ లేదు. అర్థం చేసుకునే వాళ్ళు చేసుకున్నారు. కమ్యూనిటీలో అదండి నా స్థానం. అందరితో చేశానండి, వాళ్ళందరూ కూడా చాలా బాగా చూసుకుంటారు. నాకు కూడా వాళ్ళంటే చాలా ప్రేమ, అమ్మ అమ్మ అని పిలుస్తారు. నాకేమి డిఫరెన్స్ కనపడదండి, అందరూ నా పిల్లలే. వాళ్ళని కూడా చక్కగా చూసుకుంటారు, మా ఇంటికి రావడానికి ఉత్సాహపడతారు. మమ్మీ దగ్గరికి వెళ్దాం, మమ్మీ వచ్చిందా అని అంటారు.
Wow, that's a heavy question. I ran from my Desi identity. I mean, I literally didn't want to be seen in Desi South Asian communities because I never got acceptance. Vividly remember this. I'm more of a Hindu than my parents, so she makes fun of me. So I do my prayers and everything, and I've, really come back to my religion. So I go to the temple, and I remember going to in Toronto after I transitioned. A year later, I'd gone to a temple where I used to go every Saturday, and I used to volunteer, and they'd seen me before my transition. And when I went there, they didn't recognize me, but I actually told the priest and everybody, and they kicked me out of the temple. So I just really took off and went away from my religion, and I built my own microcosm of culture and being in my culture, cooking food, watching TV and watching to Indian songs. And that's how I stayed with my cultural identity because it didn't recognize my gender identity. And though they are all parts of me, I lived in very, very much isolation when it came to culture. I tried to go into uncharted places like, Indian stores, grocery stores, and, there is a different level of treatment that I used to get. And, I've come back to it and I realized that, one cannot go away from their culture, and Desi culture to me is very rich. And when something is very rich, it's like butter, right? It can be beautiful, but it can also be very suffocating and give you high cholesterol. So, I've definitely realized that gender journeys, sexual diversities within our culture have existed for a long time. But, thanks to the colonization, we've kind of forgotten all those. So I've done a lot of unlearning in my head, in my soul, and kind of went back to that culture. And I exist powerfully now, so we can actually do the work within our diaspora because charity begins at home, or work begins at home, and this is my home, my culture, my community. So it's been a mending relationship. Thank you. I'm just a mere soul that had the capacity and privilege and access to be able to create a space and a platform that's going to address trans GNCI intersex narratives and folks. Because the reason I had to go through what I had to go through because of the lack of understanding of what it meant to be trans, even within the LGBT communities. Already didn't have that understanding or acceptance within the Desi communities or at my workplaces. And when I went through all this and I gotten to a point where I wanted to give back, there was no better platform than Parivar Bay Area, which is a collective, that's led by trans folks, that is embodying trans folks, and that centers trans folks. And I never thought it would go so big so quickly. Somebody said, "Is it your side hustle?" I said, "No, it's my soul hustle. It's not my side hustle." And so, I basically wanted to build platforms for advocacy and inclusion and help educate, anybody in the South Asian community. Parivar has a simple mission, one of, building our South Asian queer trans family. And that's as simple as the tagline as it is. And, the inspiration has come from many, many people who I've seen do with nothing, like, Rachna and folks who have done Aruna, like doing all of this amazing work. So, the point I'm trying to make is, Parivar is a movement and we are trying to make a difference. It's not about just telling our stories, but it's actually being able to build capability and, create livelihoods for people anywhere in the world. I can keep talking, but I'll just stop there. Family to me means those that walk in when the whole world has walked out on me. Sorry, I get emotional. And when my parents were not talking to me, I didn't have any family. I was pining for that affection and that belonging. And somebody would invite me for their Thanksgiving or Christmas, and I'd be like, yeah. I vividly remember when I was going to grad school in Boise, Idaho, which is very white. There was an Afghani family that had just been, refugees, and they had been placed in Idaho by the U.S., immigration. And I vividly remember them, inviting me over and serving me like yakni pulao, like dry fruits and everything. And that's when I realized that family doesn't need to be the ones that I have a blood relationship with. So I have family everywhere in the world. My community is, my work community, where I don't necessarily talk about my trans identity or even my South Asian identity. I'm working in wine, and how does wine taste, and how much wine can I sell? And then there's a community of my motorcycle riders. I don't talk to them about my trans identity, my wine, or anything else. So there's so many communities that I've built that are very much intersecting. But, the draw for me is always going to be my South Asian queer trans community, because I understand that family is never perfect. And if someone doesn't start that conversation and doesn't get on that journey of healing and becoming better, we can't do that work. And, a lot of what my inspiration community is, again, going back to seeing those that have been marginalized and have nothing. One of my closest friends is a woman from India that I met in Seattle. She was, a victim of domestic abuse. Sorry, trigger warning. She was a victim of domestic abuse with 3 children. And I remember, going to help her. All her stuff was literally in a laundry bag. Today, she's one of the millionaires in Seattle. And those are the stories that inspire me, because at the end of the day, I went through my struggles, and I'm not minimizing it, but I'm still a woman of privilege. We all have privilege, but I have that privilege of having access to education, employment. And so when I see such folks who built from nothing, that really inspires me to keep going. And, one of the things that Parivar went this big so quickly was because we were trying to help folks during COVID. And little did we know that the organizations we were working in India, so we worked with Motri Sanjog, which is the first trans inclusive shelter, Aravaniyat Project, which makes artists out of, trans folks, and then, trans vision and trans equality that Rachana is involved in. And they were literally starving. And that was not okay. We are all one world. And, that's where I really understood that is my community too. And so, all the funds and everything we did, we raised a total of 47 lakhs. Rachna was on the forefront of that, and she supported not just trans people, but everybody. So here's what I say. When trans people build communities, they bring everybody in, even those communities that don't invite us in.
చిన్నప్పుడు అంటే మారింది, తర్వాత కెనడా వచ్చేసిందండి. తర్వాత మ్యారేజ్ చేసుకుంది. నేను తనతో పాటే ఉన్నాను కెనడాలో 3-4 years. ఆ తర్వాత ఇండియా వెళ్ళానండి. ఎప్పుడు వస్తూ ఉంటాను. తను కూడా పాపం ఇండియా మాత్రం రాలేదండి. నేను కూడా పెద్ద ఇన్సిస్ట్ చేయలేదు. బికాస్ అక్కడ ఎలా ఉంటుందో పరిస్థితి, నువ్వు అప్పుడే రావద్దని చెప్పాను. కొన్నాళ్ళు అయ్యాక వచ్చింది ఇండియా. మొన్ననే వచ్చినప్పుడు చాలా భయపడుతూ వచ్చిందండి. బికాజ్ ఎందుకు వచ్చిందంటే నాకు మా వారికి కోవిడ్ వచ్చిందండి. నో వన్ ఈస్ దేర్.
Sorry to hear
Look
that.
after.
And they don't live in India as such.
మా పెద్ద అబ్బాయి ఇక్కడ హాస్టల్లో ఉంటాడండి. వాడికి 2 పిల్లలు. ఆ పిల్లల్ని వేసుకుని వాడు రావడానికి వాడికి భయం. ఇంకెవ్వరూ లేరు. తను పాపం భయం, అమ్మ నువ్వు వద్దన్నావు ఇన్నాళ్ళు, కానీ నేను వస్తాను, నేను నువ్వు వదిలిపెట్టను మీకు అని చెప్పి ధైర్యంగా దిగిందండి. ఇండియాలో ల్యాండ్ మోపింది కాలు, కానీ ధైర్యంగా ఉంది. అసలు ఎవ్వరు ఏం పట్టించుకోలేదు. శుభ్రంగా వచ్చింది. డాక్టర్ రూత్ చక్కగా ట్రీట్ చేసింది, మమ్మల్ని చక్కగా పెట్టుకుంది. నెల్లాళ్ళు హోటల్లో పెట్టి ట్రీట్ చేసింది. తల్లిలాగండి. నాకు ఆ కూతురు అని అనిపించదు, మదరే. అంత బాగా చూసుకుంది. ఇంకా నేను ఏమని చెప్తాను చెప్పండి? నువ్వు మారావని నేను ఎట్లా క్రిటిసైజ్ చేస్తాను? అర్హత కూడా లేదు. అంత బాగా చూసుకుని తీసుకొచ్చి నన్ను ఇక్కడ నుంచి కదలద్దు, నువ్వు నా దగ్గరే ఉండాలి, ఎక్కడికి వెళ్ళొద్దు, నీ హెల్త్ అంతా నేను చూసుకుంటాను అని. ఈవెన్ ఇప్పుడు మా హస్బెండ్ కూడా అక్కడ ఉన్నారండి. నేను తన దగ్గర ఎందుకున్నాను, ఫుల్ కాన్ఫిడెన్స్, నాకు తల్లి, అందుకే నేను వదిలిపెట్టి వెళ్ళనండి. మా వారినే రమ్మన్నాను, 6 months ఒకసారి వస్తారు. ఆయన కూడా పాపం చాలా చేంజ్ అయ్యారండి, ఉన్నమాట చెప్పుకోవాలి, చాలా చేంజ్ అయ్యారు. ప్రేమ అనేది మనిషిని మారుస్తుందండి, తన ప్రేమతో మార్చుకుంది అందరినీ, ఆయన్ని కూడా మార్చింది. మళ్ళీ రేపు నెక్స్ట్ మంత్ వస్తున్నారు. ఈవెన్ మా అబ్బాయి మా కోడలండి, అది నా అదృష్టం. మా కోడలైతే, ఎందుకు అత్తమ్మా నీకు ఎవరంటే నీకేంటి, మన అంజలి, మన రిమ్మి, మీరు ఇంకొకరిని పట్టించుకోవద్దు, నేను పరాయి దాన్నైనా నేను చెప్తున్నాను మీకు. ఈవెన్ వాళ్ళ ఇంట్లో సత్యనారాయణ వ్రతం అయితే కూడా అండి, తను ఉంది అప్పుడు, ఫీల్ అయింది కొంచెం, అమ్మ అందరూ వస్తారు వదిన ఏం చేయమంటావు అని. ఏం పర్వాలేదు, నేను ఇంట్రడ్యూస్ చేసుకుంటాను, నువ్వు ఉండు, వ్రతం చూడు, చక్కగా ప్రసాదం తీసుకో, అన్ని చేసుకుని ఉండు అని. అందరూ వచ్చారండి, అందరికీ చెప్పింది. మా సిస్టర్, మా వారి చెల్లెలు అని చెప్పిందండి. చాలండి, నాకు ఆ అదృష్టం చాలు. ఈ అమ్మాయి అదృష్టం అండి నిజంగా. మారిందని కాదు కానీ అన్ని విధాల భగవంతుడు కూడా సహకారం అందించాడండి. లేకపోతే అసలు వాళ్ళ డాడీ మాట్లాడతారని నేను అనుకోలేదు. తన మంచితనంతో డాడీ అలా కాదు ఇలా కాదు, నాకు మనసు ఇంత బాధపడింది అని చెప్పి ఎంతో మార్చిందండి మనిషిని. అలాగే చేసి ఇంకా రిమ్మి గురించి చెప్పాలంటే ఇంకేం లేదండి, నాకు తల్లే, ఇంకా అంత అటాచ్మెంట్ అండి, చాలా ఇదండి. అసలు మా కాళ్ళు ఇలా పెట్టనివ్వదు, కొంచెం తుమ్మితే చాలు, మమ్మీ వెళ్దామా డాక్టర్ దగ్గరికి వెళ్దామా అంటే చాలు కదండి. మా అమ్మ కూడా అంత ప్రేమించలేదు నన్ను, అందుకని ఇంకా అటాచ్మెంట్ అనేది నేను మర్చిపోలేను, నా అదృష్టం.
Wow. Well, I would just really request, my mom is better suited to answer this, but I would just really request parents to understand that this is authentic. This is not a phase. This is not a limited series. This is not a fad. This is the authentic self that's speaking. And to realize that they are not victims, and we need to get out of the herd mentality of వాళ్ళేమనుకుంటారు, నేనేం చెప్పాలి, నేను ఆన్సర్ చెప్పాలి అందరికీ, and I think it's love. It's so easy to hate somebody, కానీ ప్రేమతో ఉండి ప్రేమని పంచడం అనేది అందరి వల్ల కాదు. సో I just request parents to rise up and own, అంటే మీ పిల్లల్ని మీరు కాదనుకోకండి, నేర్చుకోండి. Like, do your research, educate yourself so you are equipped to support your kids. Trans queer అనే కాదండి, ఫస్ట్ జనరేషన్ వాళ్ళు చాలా మంది నేను చూస్తున్నాను కదా, వేరే వేరే కాన్ఫ్లిక్ట్స్ ఉంటాయి. ఇప్పుడు మా అన్నయ్య కూతురు ఉంది, I can already see that there's a generational dispute or a conflict on various value systems and such. So I think it's important for parents to realize that if you made a journey as an immigrant here, and your kid comes out as queer, it's not an influence of Western culture. It's the fact that we, as who we are, have always existed. So anti ala koncham open mind ga undi మాట్లాడి, ఇప్పుడు బాలన్ లాంటి వాళ్ళు ఇలాంటి ఈవెంట్స్ కి వచ్చినప్పుడు, but also talking about their kids with pride.
పేరెంట్స్ ఇప్పుడు పిల్లలు ఇలా మారుతున్నారు అని తెలిసినప్పుడు అండి, వాళ్ళని ఎక్కువ బాధ పెట్టకుండా వాళ్ళని దగ్గర కూర్చోబెట్టుకుని వాళ్ళ మనసులో బాధ ఏంటి, ఎందువల్ల ఇలా మారడానికి ఏంటి కారణం, ఎందువల్ల మారుతున్నావు, దీనివల్ల కలిగిన నష్టాలు ఏంటి, ఇది నష్టం, మన సమాజంలో ఇలా చూస్తారు, నువ్వు హ్యావ్ టు బేర్ ఎవ్రీథింగ్, నువ్వు అది చేయగలవా, నీకు ఆ ధైర్యం ఉందా చెప్పు. ఇవన్నీ కూడా మనం కూర్చోబెట్టి మనసారంగా అడగాలి. అంతేగాని మనం కోపం తెచ్చేసుకుని వాళ్ళని బాధించేసి నువ్వు ఇలా చేసావు అలా చేసావు అని అంటే వాళ్ళు ఇంకా ఆత్మహత్య ప్రయత్నాలు కూడా చేస్తారు. చిన్నపిల్లలకి ఏముందండి, వాళ్ళకి మనసు వికలం అయిపోద్ది. అమ్మ నాన్నే నా గురించి పట్టించుకోరే అని. అందువల్ల అలా కాకుండా వాళ్ళని కొంత బాధ మనకి ఎవరు యాక్సెప్ట్ చేయం కదండి. నిజంగా చెప్తున్నా. ఎంత బాధగా ఉంటుంది మనకి బాధ. కానీ మనం ఏం చేస్తాం? పిల్లలకు ఉండే బాధ కంటే మన బాధ తక్కువే. వాళ్ళ బాధనే ముందు మనం చూడాలి. ముందు తరం వాళ్ళు. వాళ్ళకి ఏంటి కావాలి? సరే ఇలా ఉంది, ఇలా మారుతాం. వాళ్ళకి కావాల్సిందేంటి? ముందు మీరు చదువుకునేది చదువుకోవాలి. మంచి డిగ్రీలు చదువుకుని, తర్వాత మంచి ఉద్యోగంలో స్థిరపడి, ఆర్థికంగా ఎవ్వరి మీద ఆధారపడకుండా, చక్కగా ఉండి, నీ జీవితం నువ్వు ఆడగా ఉంటావో, మగవా అంటావు నీ ఇష్టం. యూ కెన్ క్యారీ ఆన్. కానీ మనస్థితి కూడా బాగుండాలి. సెల్ఫ్ కాన్ఫిడెన్స్ అనేది ఉండాలి. మధ్యలో నువ్వు బ్యాక్ అండ్ అయిపోకూడదు. అయ్యో నేను తప్పు చేశానే అనే భావం నీలో ఉండకూడదు. అవన్నీ ఆత్మస్థైర్యంతో నువ్వు ముందుకెళ్తానంటే నేను నీకు అండగా ఉంటాను అని ప్రతి తల్లి తండ్రి చెప్పాలండి. అంతేగాని వాళ్ళని డిస్కరేజ్ చేసి వాళ్ళని బాధ పెట్టి మనం బాగుకునేది ఏమి ఉండదండి. వాళ్ళు నాశనం అయిపోతారు అంతే. అందుకని మనం జాగ్రత్తగా వాళ్ళని గైడెన్స్ ఇచ్చుకుంటూ మనం బాధపడతాం. బాధ లేదని నేను చెప్పనండి. పడుతూనే మన బాధపడుతూనే వాళ్ళని గైడెన్స్ ఇచ్చి మంచి మార్గంలో నడిపించి మంచిగా ఫైనాన్షియల్ స్టేటస్ ఏర్పరిచి నలుగురిలో గౌరవంగా మీకు మంచి ఉద్యోగం కారు బంగ్లా ఉందనుకోండి ఎవరు ఏమంటారు మీరు ఎలా ఉన్నా ఎవరు పట్టించుకోరు. ఆర్థికంగా బాగున్నప్పుడు సగం 50% మనం సక్సెస్ అయినట్టు. అందుకని అలా గైడెన్స్ ఇచ్చుకుంటూ పిల్లలతో కష్టమో నిష్ఠూరమో అలా సాగిపోవాలండి అంతే. ఇది నేను అనుకుని నా జీవితంలో జరిగింది అదే అండి. ఫస్ట్లో చాలా బాధపడ్డాను, కొట్టాను, తిట్టాను. ఆ తర్వాత ఇంక సరే ఇది మారటం లేదు, నేనే మారదాం అని చెప్పి.
Success is relative, it's not absolute, and it's the individual's milestone. The Desi community's barometer of success is a good job. Like my mom alluded to it. I sometimes wonder how the relationship would have been if I wasn't, so successful in my career and financially. Um, but I would say we should really dispel that. We should smash that status quo and go away from that success. Because success at the end of the day is being able to live as a good human being. There's only two measures of success, good and bad. And if you are good, you're going to be able to do many good things, including being trans affirming and trans inclusive, whether it's your child or somebody else. Success also means to be in a clear and clean state of mind. Success does not mean that you amass so much tangible stuff and you live a very miserable soul and of a mental health that has never been addressed. And we often leave that behind in the South Asian community, and we think success is by getting to this goal. And I have been caught up in that rat race. For me, it was, did I climb up the ladder? Did I get this title? Did I buy another home? And very quickly, my world started to crumble because I didn't take care of my mental health. And, that's very important in terms of success. And finally, I think success for an individual is also what their dreams are and how they have fulfilled them. Success is not something that you believe and what you measure yourself, and that's how you build your self-worth. And in my case, a lot of my self-esteem and inferiority complex, as my dad used to say, was from me not understanding that somebody else doesn't need to correct my question paper, answer sheet, and tell me how many marks I got. I evaluate my own self and I assess what success looks like. And if not, I'll redraw the map again. I would just say it is bliss, and we have to go back and look into the understanding of what religion is. Hinduism, Islam, any religion, these are boundaries that have been defined by humankind on this earth. There's no, this is the religion you're supposed to follow, and this is the religion you would follow. These are the customs in but it's also what you take out of context and what you bring in to the text when it doesn't exist. I will just say Bhagavad Gita, for example, clearly mentions that this body is not permanent and it can take many shapes and forms. The soul is what really exists. And I don't want to get too philosophical, but I think when somebody says that religion doesn't allow us to be who we are, I think we need to do an introspection of what that means, especially in the Eastern cultures and Eastern religions, Hinduism. As you know, there's Ardhanarishwara to Mohini to our mythology speaks very proudly of gender fluidity, and we have to maybe educate them when that happens. It's not an easy journey, but it's also been an evolving place where I have seen gay Hindu temple priests. I have met imams who are gay and they're trying to make a difference, because ultimately religion is what allows one person to get privilege and ride that so they can get to the next place, whether that is sitting on a big golden chair and getting your feet washed with milk, or if it is just building lots and lots of home bungalows that you only got because of where you sat. Here's what I say. We have got to fight the anti-Blackness in the South Asian community, because Black people are the ones, we are all having this Zoom call right now. The immigration reform that came through in 1966, I believe, somebody keep in check, was actually what opened the gates for Asian people to be here. So we have to fight that. And there's various ways to fight it. And I say fight may be a very strong word, but we have to recognize, oh, thank you, Palvi, keeping me in check, thank you. So I think it's important to recognize that those have been themes and sentiments for all the time that we have existed in North America. Because if you really look at it, when I was in India, there was a lot of colorism. There was a lot of, the skin tone that really played a big role. The fair and lovelies, all that. Whereas, coming to this country, I had to learn and unlearn a lot of it, because we are still all prevailing with colonized minds. And outside of that, we are all people in the same communities of color. And so we have an extremely important part to play, because South Asian communities are the second richest community in America. So I'm going to just blanket statement say that we all have so much more privilege than a Black person who's been denied access to good health care, to good education, and need to be uplifted. And so we cannot say, oh, he didn't go to school, so we're not going to hire him. You got to go past all these, societal norms and qualifications and such. I can think of, and what we do at Parivar is still a very humble attempt at that, but I'm really, it's about teachings and learnings and making sure that everything we do does not perpetuate that anti-Blackness further. And we have to also deconstruct where it originates from. And that originates, in my opinion, and some studies have said, is the white supremacy, white obsession we have, where we have, we come into this country, and again, I'm generalizing, I typically speak with an I statement, but I see this in my workplace. We have got Asian folks, we've got South Asian folks, we've got a Black person on my, and this happened on my team. And we are all competing to appease to the white boss, because we think that there's some level of, some level of designation you get by associating and being seen with whiteness. And that there's some level of degradation by being with Black folks and being in communities of color. So, we got to be less part of the problem, and we got to be less ethnocentric. We got to branch out and be open to learn. And, live example is I live in East Oakland. I don't have any Indian communities around me. This is a very Black neighborhood. And I can tell you, I can count on my fingers how many South Asian friends have shown up at my place. And it's typically the same people. And that's where I question, like, you can't just mention it and get away and keep moving on. And then we have to also understand that people of color doesn't mean all of us started at the same place. I can talk for hours about how passionate I am about doing all this work. And that's why I always say, if we can uplift and save Black trans lives from getting erased, we will uplift everybody in this country. I would just add that, there's something called different things that we can address at different times. Like, in the South Asian community, we're still struggling to get women equal rights, equal space, and equal opportunities of female identifying folks and bodies and pronouns. And so that might be a priority. That should be. And, I've heard people say, yeah, we need to get through that. I remember this, I was, supposed to do an event with one of my companies in India. And they said, no, we can't do any LGBT right now. We just need to first get women empowerment going, because this company's very problematic and how they treat women. I was like, okay, but let's not forget that we are all living at intersections, and we can't just address one and not the other. So, and then when we don't talk about the most critical problem in this country, your silence or one silence is actually adding to it. And each has their own level. You don't really see me going out and getting in front of protests and such, because I have folks who are dependent on me, and I fear for my own safety as a trans woman of color. So there's ways to do it. And I might just, close by saying, to try to recruit folks who have your parents' trust. And I never speak when I don't have lived experience, but I think 26 was pretty old for me when I knew that I was myself when I was 11. So, it was a good 15 years, right? And here's what I say. Again, we go back to what you asked, right? What is the success measure? So if you believe that you are who you are, let me just take myself in a hypothetical situation. I usually don't like to say we and you. So if, let's say, I didn't transition until now, I'm 41 today. How, like, I would have thought about, would I lose my job? Would I lose my home? Would I lose my parents and all that? So those things don't go away. It's still a journey, but maybe there is something else where there's spouse, there's children involved and such. But the fact of the matter is, there's only one life. And for me, if I was going through that, I would still make it happen, but somehow ensure that I don't measure my success in terms of keeping any of this. I know folks who are, as they're called, I wouldn't like put labels, but late risers, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, in how they transition later in life, because they have been really conforming to how the society expects them to perform. It's very performative, and it's very reductive of how they've lived their life until that point. I have such close sisters who regret that they went to Harvard and finished their law degree versus actually being able to transition because they wanted to become a lawyer. So I think to each their own, but there's a fine balance. And I think I might want to just say, from what I have seen, that you might have a better set of allies if you're transitioning later in life. From it's not proven by data or anything. There's two parts to it. One is the Hijra identity, and we have to, make sure we break that down. Hijra is very respectable of an identity, and it's a socio-psychological female presentation, but that's a culture. Not all Hijras are trans people. It is a indoctrination into a very close-knit group or family that is expected to employ and conduct certain public aspects because that is what they've been bestowed with. In history, Ram went to Vanvas and he said, "I will be back, ladies and gentlemen." and he left behind. He didn't say everybody in between. And so they are considered to be pious and beautiful. I identify myself with the Hijra community, but it's quite different from how it's to be trans in India. And I learned this by being on the ground. And I think the second part is where I came to my own learning of they, them. I had a major episode, as I mentioned, when I felt, I had to have surgery and my whole head was shaved and my mom was sick, like my grandfather had passed away. Everything happened at the same time. And my dysphoria was through the roof because, again, my brother had control of my situation because I was basically helpless. And my dysphoria just kicked in so badly that I started questioning if I was a woman after living myself for about 10 years at that point. So then I realized that even though I'm trans and I've gone from one gender to another, I'm still attesting to the gender binary. And that, that is a label that I'm trying to give myself and get validation because the society at large says, you're a woman by doing these characteristics and you're a man if you do it this way. And so I would really, emphasize, to myself to say that I'm not going to stretch myself to try to conform to one way or the other. I like to dress up. I like to wear saris. I like all of those. That if that qualifies me as a woman, so be it. If it doesn't, because somebody heard my voice on Clubhouse or something and assumed me as a mister, I don't care. So I think it's a journey, but also at the same time, I would say it's beautiful to be in gender fluid journeys. And I actually think if my generation had this awareness and understanding of what gender non-binary and gender non-conforming is, as the new Gen Z and the millennials and all those have, I think it would have been much easier of a journey. Not to say that I wouldn't have transitioned, who knows, right? All of that. So I hope that answered, but I would say don't really look for validation of gender from somebody else, but to be content in yourself. It's hard. It's very hard. Trust me, I get it. That's my unprofessional advice. Absolutely. Parivar Bay Area is virtual, so it is Bay Area, but I would say you can get online, parivarbayarea.org. Our email is parivarbayarea@gmail.com. And there's many ways you can get involved. We are always looking for folks who are the vision and the leadership to guide us and move us along, because we're still very much in a growing phase. But it's also about collaborations. If you feel like there is a way you can support, you have an organization that we can come together and address bigger societal issues like anti-Blackness or xenophobia, let's get together. And an individual level, I invite you to check out our Insta, Facebook. We have a support group that happens at least twice a month. It's called Rubaru. That used to happen, obviously, in the building in San Francisco. Now it's all virtual, so it's boundaryless. We've had people join from everywhere. And we are here to support you. And I, as an individual, I'm here to support you in any way I can. And if I can be of any help to any parent, any trans queer sibling of mine, or any person who just wants to get support, Parivar is very invested in working in the South Asian diaspora. So it's about making sure that we are driving that visibility, but also that acceptance in South Asian communities for trans, queer, intersex folks. And one of the things I just want to mention is that this takes a lot of courage. The DRPA, Parivar, these organizations are the new phase of South Asian queer trans movements. And I say that because even right now, as we speak, the queer movement in North America has been primarily driven by cis Hindu gay men. So we have to recognize that, and we have to peel past that and make sure that we are addressing the issues of the other letters in the alphabet soup And it's important to have centering around things that are non-cis, non-male identifying, non-Hindu, so we can actually build a better world. I think we have to recognize that trigger warning, that's trans youth have one of the highest suicide rates in this country. And, we need more of Pallavis who do the work with youth and help them understand that, they're seen and heard. And this is a very South Asian norm of assuming that one's child is their property and that they don't have their own voice. So if your child is saying that they are trans at 4 years of age, don't discount that. A child who is not trans will not be saying that. Let me just say that, because children are not that manipulative and they don't know much about the world, but they only know about who they are and what they can express in the little few vocabulary they have. I think it's also important to build that bridge, right? So when we talk about our South Asian community, we have a great, I think 79% of India's population is under the age of 35. So you've got to make sure that you're not leaving either end of the spectrum when it comes to age. And, understand that each one of us has a different journey. I know folks who have transitioned when they were 69 years old. So when somebody is youth, LGBTQ youth are able to express and be themselves from a younger age, you're helping build such a strong foundation that I assure you that they're going to become very, very powerful contributing members of the community. And the South Asian community needs to understand that children, and this country is all about individualism. So let's make sure that the LGBT youth voice is not left behind. And that applies beyond just the community, right? Like in the South Asian community, let's listen to LGBTQ youth in general and make sure that their voices are heard in places where we typically don't think they need to be involved in, whether it's your temple, whether it's your grocery store, any other place where you are their ally in a safe way, in a safe place, and they're able to still share their journeys, because some of them are powerful. They inspire me.
కరెక్టే అండి. పిల్లలతో తల్లిదండ్రుల మధ్య పిల్లల మధ్య అవగాహన అనేది ఉండాలండి. మాట్లాడే స్వాతంత్రం ఉండాలి. వాళ్ళు మనసు విప్పి మనకు చెప్పుకునే ఫ్రీడమ్ వాళ్ళకి ఇవ్వాలి మనం. అంతేగాని మనం కన్నాం కదా, మన అథారిటీగా ఉండాలి, మన మాట వినాలి, అలా పెట్టుకుంటే వాళ్ళు ఏం చెప్పలేరు. మనసు వాళ్ళు కష్టపెట్టుకుని వాళ్ళు విపరీతంగా తయారవ్వచ్చు. అందుకని వాళ్ళ మనసుకు దగ్గరగా వచ్చి వాళ్ళ మెల్లగా నచ్చజెప్పి ఎలా ఉంది, ఏంటి పని, నీకు ఎలా అనిపిస్తుంది, హౌ టు లీవ్, ఎలా అనుకుంటున్నావు, ఎలా బతకాలనుకుంటున్నావు అని వాళ్ళని క్లియర్గా క్షుణ్ణంగా చిన్నప్పటి నుంచే, వీడు చిన్నోళ్ళే వీడినేం పట్టించుకోక్కర్లేదు అనుకోవద్దండి. 6 ఏళ్ల నుంచే వాడికి అన్ని జ్ఞానాలు తెలుస్తుంది. ఇప్పుడు టీవీల వల్ల, సినిమాల వల్ల అన్ని తెలుస్తున్నాయి. 6 years 7 years నుంచే వాడికి అన్ని ఒక అవగాహన వచ్చేస్తూ ఉంది ఇప్పుడు. అందుకని వాళ్ళు అప్పటి నుంచే మనం గమనించుకుంటూ ఉండాలి. పిల్లోడు ఎలా ఉన్నాడు, ఏం మార్పులు వస్తున్నాయి గమనించుకుంటూ, మంచివా చెడ్డవా అని ఆలోచించుకుంటూ, వాడు ఒకవేళ మన డిస్కషన్కి వచ్చి నేను ఇలా మారుతాను అంటే, సరే దానివల్ల కష్ట నష్టాలు ఏంటి, నువ్వు ఇలా ఉంటుంది, మేము కూడా ఎదుర్కోవాల్సి వస్తుంది, నువ్వేం చేద్దాం అనుకుంటున్నావు, నువ్వు ధైర్యంగా ఎదుర్కోగలవా, నీకు ఆ ధైర్యం ఉందా అని ఇలా వాడిని మొత్తం క్షుణ్ణంగా పరిశీలించాక వాడికి కావాల్సినటువంటి ఎంకరేజ్మెంట్ ఇచ్చి వాడిని ముందుకు నడిపించాలి. ముందు ఆర్థికంగా కానీ స్వాతంత్రం ఉంచుకుని ముందు చదువుకొని తర్వాత ఇవన్నీ స్టెప్ బై స్టెప్ చేసుకో, సెటిల్ అవ్వు జీవితంలో అని చెప్పాలండి. అప్పుడు తల్లిదండ్రులుగా మన బాధ్యత అనేది నెరవేరుతుంది.
I just want to clarify, her template of success is what she's seen of me, by putting my gender transition on hold and making something out of myself. But again, that's my measure of success, right? So I'm again conforming to that, that problematic way. But I think it's about making sure that they have the resources.
అదొకటి. మనం ఇప్పుడు ఇలా మారిన వాళ్ళు గుడికి బజార్కి ఏమన్నా వచ్చారనుకోండి, మనమే కొంచెం ఇలా చూస్తుంటాం. అలాంటివన్నీ మనం కూడా ఎంకరేజ్ చేయకూడదు. వాళ్ళని మనతో పాటు సమానం, మన పిల్లలతో సమానం అన్నట్టుగా చూడాలండి. స్పెషల్గా వాళ్ళని మనం ఒకలా చూడకూడదు. అది అందరినీ సమానంగా చూసుకుంటూ వెళ్ళాలి. వాళ్ళని కూడా మన పిల్లల్లాగా భావించుకోవాలి. వాళ్ళ ఫీలింగ్స్ అర్థం చేసుకోవాలండి ముందు.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thanks for having us.